Keith Simanton, we are days away from the Academy Awards, and prognosticators coast to coast are in a state of panic. We are looking to you to give us clarity and give us some sense of what's really going on. Best Picture, let's start there. What the hell is going to win that category?
Well, first of all, you might want to look elsewhere. but you know, I tend to grapple myself with hoops of steel to movies that I love and that I would like to see actually win these things. Initially, I think, and I've kept with my picks. I've made very few adjustments. Frankly, from the beginning, I had J.K. Simmons originally. I had Patricia Arquette originally. I had Keaton, although I think Keaton. We'll go to your question. I've kept with a lot of my picks, and two of my picks were for Best Picture and Best Director. And Best Picture going to Boyhood, which I think is unlikely now. But
well, it's not necessarily unlikely. Let's look at the stats here. Right? We have two conflicting sets of tea leaves, and one of them says you're right. One of them says, and that's BAFTA, Boyhood's going to win that, and Linklater's going to win Director, because, look, for the past 6 years, BAFTA's been right about Best Picture. However, over here we have this guild stack of tea leaves with PGA, DGA, and SAG that all say that Birdman's going to win. And if you look at the last 7 years of PGA history, they've been right about Best Picture every year. So is it really Birdman? So that's, you know, we're on our own this year. We're flying without a net.
I'll tell you, the most compelling reason for me to switch over, which I may do, as much as it pains me, is kind of that Hollywood, the creative aspect of someone putting on a show. You know, this happened with Shakespeare in Love over Saving Private Ryan. You know, very few members of AMPAS, Rod Steiger, I think, would be one of the exceptions, landed at Anzio or Gold, you know, for D-Day, but they'd all put on a production. So, you know, you can totally understand putting on a show all about Eve. Same thing. What's Birdman? Birdman's a lot of things. It was my number 3 movie of the year. But it's about, you know, putting on the creative will and the need and the daunting challenges to doing something, anything like that.
No, that's true. And two recent Best Picture winners were also putting on a show. You know, Argo was putting on this fake movie to save the hostages. The Artist, of course, was all about trying to save their show while the show was changing with the introduction of sound. The problem with the idea of going with Birdman, though, is there is no precedent for a movie that kooky to win Best Picture. You know, floating bodies, disembodied voices, Birdman flying over. They just don't normally vote for something like that. And here's the other curious thing, Keith, and that is, you know, a lot of people are saying the parallel here is 4 years ago with The Social Network winning all the early awards, and then the minute you get to the Hollywood Guilds, it changed, and it was The King's Speech, the more emotional movie. Well, we're seeing a similar thing right now. We're seeing one movie dominate all the early awards, and then all of a sudden it changes the minute we hit the Guilds. But the emotional movie is the one being left behind.
Exactly.
And that's what's strange here, and that's what makes me skeptical about believing that Birdman, even though that's my prediction, I may switch over to Boyhood too. I mean, I'm skeptical about that because Hollywood does have a heart, contrary to the to what they seem, these egotistical monsters out here. But they do vote for sentimental stuff.
That's just you and me.
Oh, okay. But they do vote for the sentimental stuff, like The Artist and The King's Speech. Absolutely. That's what was behind those.
But I think you've got a great point, which is that to the films that would have fit into that mold would have been Imitation Game and Theory of Everything, and I just don't think they're kind of that King's Speech parallel for me, and I certainly don't think either of them are going to be Best Picture or have Best Directors.
Yeah. We just have to admit we simply don't know, and it's nice to have this suspense. Because last year everything went according to script. There was not a single surprise in a top category. Everything won, you know, right down the.
And I was, you know, grievously wrong last year, so I'm sure I'll be grievously wrong this year. But,
Oh, did you go out on that Gravity limb?
I stuck with and I stuck with Gravity because of the preferential, because of the system. A lot of the people I talked to in AMPAS had to admit they hadn't quite gotten themselves up to see 12 Years a Slave.
I don't think they ever saw 12 Years a Slave. I think they just voted for it because they had to. And you know that Gravity was close in the running because it tied Slave at PGA. It was the first time that ever happened. And you weren't alone, remember, among the pundits who were picking Gravity. We had very esteemed prognosticators like Pete Hammond of Deadline and Steve Pond of The Rap, who were also saying Gravity. And I came close to switching over, too, to try to catch that long shot. No, I shouldn't say there were no surprises last year. In a way, it was a surprise that 12 Years a Slave went without a serious challenge from Gravity, but at least it won directly.
And you got Quran winning.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's one of the fascinating aspects of this one. For me, the preferential system, even if I assume that Gravity would be the #2 film for a lot of people. And so if their pick wasn't in the running, their #2 was probably going to be Gravity, not 12 Years. And I'm not sure that logic played out. This year, I think it's going to be very stark. I think it's going to be one or the other. And I don't know. I think it's probably they're gonna give a lot of stuff to Grand Budapest, which I'm going to be very happy about. Certainly technical and production, that kind of thing. But I don't think you have the same close dichotomy of 12 Years versus Gravity. I think it's either Birdman or it's Boyhood. I don't see a lot of spillover. Right. What do you think?
Right. And there are some other things that we have to point out here, and that is, for example, that the movie with the most nominations usually wins. This year, Birdman and Budapest are tied. However, you have to normally have a nomination for Best Editing to win Best Picture.
Yeah.
The last time a film did that without an editing nomination was Ordinary People back in 1981. So you got to go back more than 30 years to find that exception. So, but yet there are other flips, and you can say, well, if Birdman wins, it lost Best Comedy Musical Picture at the Globes to Budapest. So the last movie that lost Best Comedy Musical Picture at the Globes but won Best Picture at the Oscars was Annie Hall back in, 77 or whatever. So, I mean, you've got all these things that are just contradicting each other.
Having Birdman shoehorned into comedy musical is I mean, I suppose that's where I'd put it too, but it's not really a comedy or a musical. It's got funny moments, and there certainly is that amazing percussion score that is, but it's not a musical, and it's
that's true.
A comedy. I think Inritu said it well, which was we're trying to make a comedy, we really failed at it. Tom, I wanted to talk to you about this, which is I think this is the year where I've been the most disappointed in who was left out.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, absolutely. I think David Oyelowo, for my money, Ray Fiennes for Grand Budapest is, I find that omission, frankly, maddening. I think it's a phenomenal performance, and again, it's a comedy performance, so it's those do tend to get overlooked. But I think or Jake Gyllenhaal for Nightcrawler. Right. Some astounding performances. I was actually pretty sure that Aniston was going to make a last-minute run for Best Actress, and either not Marianne Cotillard or not Felicity Jones. And I was actually surprised and disappointed. I felt she deserved it.
Absolutely, and she got SAG. She got the Golden Globes nomination. Aniston did. So normally that's a shoo-in that you're in. And I don't know how that Cotillard movie got in there. I finally caught up with it a few weeks ago, and it's not a great movie. Let's put it that way. Not that Cake is such a great movie, but Aniston does give a good performance there.
And Marianne Cotillard is wonderful. She's wonderful in Rust and Bone. She's wonderful in from the thing that won her, Levy Ann Rhodes. She's a great actress. I felt 2 Days, 1 Night was just a very one-note performance. I was very surprised by it. But then again, I mean, they're going to give it to Julianne Moore for a lifetime achievement, and she's a lovely, lovely woman, and she's very good in Still Out. But that's a movie of the week.
I know it's going to be a surprise to future film lovers to look back and go, this movie won an Oscar. But yet it's a good performance, but that's not what the Oscars are about, of course. They're not really, as you and I know, voting about the best of anything. They're voting about who we love, who we don't. Oh, who have we missed? You know,
Yeah.
Jack Lemmon's performance in Save the Tiger is probably the worst, most bombastic thing in his life. That's his Oscar. You know, poor Nicole Kidman, her Oscar has to be The Hours. You know, just a terrible movie in my estimation, and she has a little part in there besides. But it's like Katharine Hepburn once said, you always win for the wrong thing.
Yeah, I mean, Newman in Color of Money. I mean, we've talked about this before. It's like, you know, or Al Pacino's Son of a Woman. Al Pacino's Son of a Woman.
I know. That was really embarrassing.
But to your point, I also do appreciate the notion of making up for grievous past, you know, omissions. I do understand that, and particularly someone I really was surprised, and I shouldn't have been, but I was really surprised at just how lovely Julianne Moore was, and I talked to her just in 2014 for the first time, and really when Stillhouse hadn't yet quite hit, and what an absolutely wonderful woman. And you know, she also had Maps to the Stars, which she was nominated for the Globes for, which is an incredibly brave and audacious role. She plays like the worst human being in the world, and yeah, I guess I don't want to have a spoiler here, who's an actress and struggling to maintain her perch. And that's a much more daring performance than Still Alice. Yet, that's what she's going to win for. Good for her.
Oh, that's right, and it's a good performance, and it fits the Oscar mold. It's the disease, it's Alzheimer's, it's all of that. But that's not going to be the movie. When you look back at the career of Julianne Moore, that's not going to be the movie you go, oh, that's, you know, if you were playing a trivia game, what movie did she win the Oscar for? That's not going to be your first pick.
Yeah. We'll be going, The Hours, Safe, no.
Far from Heaven, right.
What do you think about Best Actor? Because on that note, you have the My Left Foot. Eddie Redmayne gets the BAFTA, winning a lot of awards. Does he end up taking it from Michael Keaton?
Well, if you run the stats, the answer is yes. For example, 17 of the past 20 winners of Best Actor at the Screen Actors Guild went on to win the Oscar, and that was Eddie in this case, of course, and he just won BAFTA. That's usually a good tea leaf, too. But if you buy the idea that Birdman's going to win Best Picture, this is where, you know, Keaton could catch a ride on the back of his bird. Best Picture almost always wins an acting award, like Lupita Nyong'o last year or Jean Dujardin with The Artist. And if that's going to be the case here, then it's, of course, Keaton that goes along for the ride, right?
Yeah, and you would say that about my other current, against the tide pick, which is Inarritu for Birdman over Linklater for Boyhood. I think Boyhood's really been making the rounds, God bless him. So, that may hold sway, and people certainly understand the audacity, the wherewithal to make something like Boyhood and how crazy that sounds and how difficult that must be. And the odds, I mean, they couldn't even have contracts because they're, indentured servitude issues. The lengths and the risks that he took, that Linklater took, I think I would love to see him win. But then again, you have Inarritu, who is a phenomenal director. I love him, Morris Paris. It's one heck of a film, and that's one crazy way to make it. As also, really threading the needle to make a work of art.
Yes, and it is a work of art, but it's not a warm, fuzzy kind of film that normally gets embraced by the Academy. I'm surprised to see all this love for it. I loved it myself. I like his movie Babel even more, or Amoris Paris, among his past films. But this is really a great accomplishment. It's just the Oscars aren't what they used to be, Keith. That's the bottom line. That we can't say anymore. Oh, the Epic is going to win Best Picture, The English Patient, or Out of Africa. These rules, just throw them out the window.
Or the Who's Got the Disability movie. You know, the rules don't apply anymore. And I think you actually had a good point. I heard you say earlier that I think Gold Derby is actually part of why this is so tough to do, because I think the expectation, but also with screeners and the rise of screeners, there is people actually have to see the movies now, and they have the ability to watch them versus going to a screening. And so many of AMPAS, like, they also have lives. There are people that it's their kid's birthday, or they have to go out to dinner. They have to make another movie. They didn't get to see all these films. Now there is, I think, the expectation, from from Gold Derby and where they see early on who might be in contention, and I think that puts a certain amount of pressure on them to really man up and or woman up, as the case may be, and see the films that are nominated, or that have been kind of shortlisted by the group.
Yeah, it's really true. I think that we pundits are actually, to some extent, leading the race. Boyhood was the prediction for Best Picture of our gang in mid-August when we made our first batch of predictions. That's pretty bold of us, if you think about it. How the hell did we know this little movie from IFC was going to be Best Picture when we could look down the pike and say, well, Unbroken looks like the made for Oscar picture, or Birdman is the directorial achievement by the overdue blah, blah, blah. But we somehow nailed it, and I think part of it was the self-fulfilling prophecy. These Oscar voters are seeing that. They kind of follow like sheep, but they may change their mind in the home stretch this year. That's what's different.
But I think if Gold Derby and doing this process actually helps movies get seen or get noticed by in a way that wouldn't have happened before, that's almost like a public service.
Yes, right.
The only thing I've changed out of the big, out of picture, director, actor, actress. Oh, I changed actress. That's not quite right. Because I had Boyhood, I had Linkletter. I briefly put David Oyelowo because I really thought that was one amazing performance and bumped Keaton down. But I've kind of kept with who I started with, particularly Patricia Arquette and J.K. Simmons. They were my first choices going out.
Have you noticed that in recent years, the supporting players in general tend to run the boards? For example, whether it's Monique or Christoph Waltz, if they get an early lead, they go the distance. That wasn't the case in the old days. You would have this one win that one, this one, and it was a hodgepodge. Again, maybe it's the self-fulfilling prophecy of the pundits saying J.K. Simmons, is out front here, and everyone looks at it and goes, oh yeah, that's really great.
Well, you felt very, very sure about Christoph Waltz. I thought it was going to be Christopher Plummer. I'm still mad about that.
Well, Christopher Plummer won. Do you mean Robert De Niro in The Year of Django?
Yes. Sorry, you're right.
Yeah. And there was somebody else with Tommy Lee Jones or something with Lincoln. There was some suspense there. Yeah.
That was when Christoph Waltz won. He was right. I'm wrong. I shall look it up. I'll look it up on IMDb.
Hey, there we go. While we're chatting here, I did get the Christoph Waltz Django one right in the end because I went with him because he had won BAFTA and the Globe, but he wasn't nominated there.
Yeah, I thought he won, in my opinion, over Plummer, who was my shortlist. But that could be wrong. I've been wrong before.
But Plummer's another good example of somebody who was out front early on. It just kept going. Amazing what's happening there.
Yeah. You're right. Waltz was over De Niro for Silver Linings, which I remember I had him picked. and Tommy Lee Jones for Lincoln, which I never thought was even that was never a serious win for me, or that was never a serious choice to me, to my mind. But I think when you have something like David Oyelowo, and just or Fiennes or Gyllenhaal, these oh hey, I was right in sort of, which is Walt's one for Inglourious Bastards over Plummer, and that was my pick that year for Last Station.
Oh, yes, for The Last Station. You're right. That's true. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mixed the years up.
You're right. And I was thinking Christopher Plummer in Beginners.
Right.
Where he won for that, though. What's your favorite movie of this year?
My favorite movie is Boyhood.
Oh.
It's Boyhood, Whiplash, and I'm very, very happy that Whiplash has made the impact that it has. I wish it was doing better at the box office. I wish people would discover it. They're going to discover it and go, oh my gosh, I've seen this film. But I think Damien Chazelle has got to be, the director has got to be happy about what's certainly happened. It's Ben Stiller kind of Beast of the Southern Wild story, but it's a great film. I'm thrilled for J.K. Simmons. When I interviewed him way back, I said, "You better get your tux out, buddy." Which is, and that's not necessarily prophetic, because it was certainly Whiplash won Best Audience and a jury prize over Boyhood at Sundance last year. So there was obviously a very wide recognition of how great that film is. And I love that J.K. Simmons and Patricia Arquette, two people that have been in the trenches for years, are going to get recognized, by their peers. I believe, unless wouldn't that be a shocker if those two didn't actually?
It would be, but that's often where those upsets come, is in the supporting categories. When Marcia Gay Harden wins and Jim Broadbent comes through. But I think these two are probably pretty safe. But if there's an upset, watch out for it here.
Yeah. And then I'd go with Birdman. Birdman's really such an unconventional, and it holds up incredibly well. I've seen it I think 4 times now. I've seen Boyhood 3. And I think one of the interesting things about Boyhood is it might be daunting, and I've heard this from people, that it's boring, that it's long, that it's not plot-driven. And it certainly isn't necessarily plot-driven. It's not it's sequential. It is how light and memory work. But I adore it. They're both very special films.
Yeah, it really is. My favorites, those are my favorites as well, but I would throw Nightcrawler in there, too.
Oh, I think Nightcrawler's in my top 10. Grand Budapest is a great film.
Yes.
The other night, when Wes Anderson, many, many years from now, when he passes, I think they'll bring up, if there was ever a, template for Wes Anderson, it's Monsieur Gustave, this fastidious, energetic, slightly foul, just bundle of energy, and it's a grand film. Gone Girls, it's interesting to watch something as good as Gone Girl be kind of an also-ran in this year, which shows what I think it's a phenomenal year for movies. A lot of people talked about how 2013 was just a watershed landmark, 1939, 1950 kind of great year. I think this year is full stack, a much better year than last year.
I agree with you. How is Neil Patrick Harris going to do as host of the Oscars? What's your prediction there?
He's going to crush it. He's going to be, that. He has a sense about him. Nobody wants to be, Georgie Jackson. Nobody wants to be Bob Hope, but or Billy Crystal, but we tend to anoint them. And I think that's Neil Patrick Harris. He's our host of ceremonies. He understands where to go with the comedy and where you don't need to. And he's a showman. I think I am pretty sure he's going to absolutely crush it. Certainly watch anything that he did with the Tonys. You know, it was very fascinating to watch Seth MacFarlane, who's an immensely talented individual, do his bit. And, you know, I also noted that, you know, he brought a lot of TV into it. In the opening, you know, he's got Captain Kirk, and he's got Bill Shatner up there. And it's also the year that SAG and AFTRA joined on. And I always wondered if that was a bit of a nod to, hey, you know what, this media landscape is changing. We are not just, TV is no longer where you go to retire. TV is doing some of the most vibrant stuff, and certainly these web series, Amazon with its Transparent, you've got a bunch, the mediums are not necessarily, they're starting to mount, and it will be fascinating to me to watch how these things are treated. You know, there are some movies, I would say Amazing Spider-Man, which felt more like a TV show, and there are TV shows, Game of Thrones or True Detective, which or Transparent, which feel more like movies.
No, I agree with you, absolutely. And I think social media has played a big role in the Oscars now too. We saw dramatic evidence of it last year with the selfie with you know, Ellen DeGeneres. That wasn't supposed to be a big moment. It was supposed to just be a product placement, of course, for Samsung, with her goofing around with Meryl Streep, and she wisely orchestrated it into this moment that is, you know, one of the great Oscar moments of all time. And now I think the pressure's on to build more and more of those interactive elements into the show, because we watch it for the live component. People are tweeting and Facebooking and Instagramming throughout the whole thing because they want to be the first with a comment when Jennifer Lawrence trips on the way up to the stairs, and they want, you know, or when the pizza guy comes in and they notice that Brad Pitt takes a slice, or one of these things. They want to participate, and that's one of the great things about the Oscars now, because I've noticed recently in the last 4 to 5 years that they've been bulletproof. They even when the movies have not been very exciting, they've done very well in terms of the ratings, and I think that's because it's must-see TV now. You have to watch.
Well, I've told you what my enduring belief about part of the reason why people watch the Oscars.
What's that?
Well, it is and it is the one point where people get up and they thank their mothers and fathers typically. And people like that. It is personable. It shows that there's some recognition that all that work I did, someone is actually going to
Yes, right.
It's a kind of kooky theory, but
no, and it's also another way to look at it is it's the ultimate reality TV show, because we get to watch our pop culture gods win and lose in live time right in front of us, just like we lose often in life, and to see them go through it, it's train wreck TV. You have to watch it.
Yeah, as Megan said, by the end of that show, it's mostly a room of losers.
Yes. We're all looking, we have to admit it, we're all looking when the boxes come up of the nominees and the winners announced, we're all looking in the other 4 boxes to see the faces of, you know, of Bill Murray going, shit, or Laura Bacall, damn.
Yeah.
And they can't help it. They forget at that moment that they're on TV, and it's all over their face, their disappointment and rage.
Yeah, so it'll be down the wire, and it'll be, I think, fascinating, and I'm sure I will be at the bottom of the barrel once again.
No, well, you have time now, Keith, to steal from all the wisest pundits. That's what we all do, of course, is look around to see, you know, well, what does so-and-so have for those animated shorts? You know, Dave Karger beat us all last year, so we got to look at Dave's predictions carefully this year. Ann Thompson, I think, won the year before, and Scott Feinberg. So stick with those 3, and if you see consensuses in categories where you can't make up your mind, just go with the flow.
Can't do it.
Oh, you go with your heart, right?
I'm a sucker that way. But I realize, again, I think that's one of the great things about what's going on with Gold Derby, which is that that it is helping to elevate films that might not be seen otherwise. It is, I think, in many ways and not necessarily a predictor, but a something that's actually allowing films to be seen and performances to be seen that might not otherwise be in the mix.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I hope that we're having a role and a positive one in the mix. I know I'm always flogging you guys to update your predictions and do this and do that because people are watching. When I make the rounds around town, people know exactly what their racetrack odds are, and they know exactly if they've been up or down, and it's stressful for me sometimes to see them and run up to them and they have an issue with what their latest odds are. But I go, hey, I have no control over that.
Yeah, I don't take this as too much of a left-handed compliment, but I have been shocked at how people know exactly what I have.
Yes.
Even to the point where I'm like, yeah, I did pick that. That's right.
They know your predictions better than you do. I know.
So it'll be a good year.
Yes, it will. Well, thank you, Keith. I hope that you kick our asses this year because you've done well in the past and not so well in other years. But I want you to win this time. Win.
I want to be right. I want to look back and go, I don't care that one. A right one.
Oh, a noble man in a ignoble world.
Always goes down in flames, I believe is the. We'll make that up now. We'll make up that phrase, that idiomatic expression now. Yeah, the noble man always goes down in flames on Gold Derby.
Okay. All right. Well, good luck to you, Keith. We'll all be watching carefully what you pick because none of us are sure what we're all picking ourselves. It's a mess.
Yeah, I was going to say, if anybody says they know, I would.
Right. Okay. Adios.